Dear YouTube, in case you are investigating this video due to a complaint about hate speech or copyright violation, allow me to give the following assurances. Firstly, a word on copyright. If the Watchtower Bible and Tract Society of Pennsylvania is unhappy because I've used their propaganda in a way they disapprove of, please know that I am very familiar with copyright law and have ensured that any use of copyrighted material in this video falls within the fair use provisions, particularly as pertain to criticism and parody. Secondly, let me ease any concerns you may have about hate speech. Though I am unapologetically a critic of the leaders of Jehovah's Witnesses, I feel no hatred whatsoever when it comes to individual believers. I have even spoken out on occasion against the harassment and mistreatment of witnesses. Rather than being hateful, this video, and indeed my channel, represents my attempt at respectfully offering a helpful resource for witnesses who are beginning to think of their faith as false or harmful and would like to know the other side of the argument. Hello viewers, and welcome to my rebuttal of the August JW Broadcasting episode, which was hosted by governing body helper Ralph Walls. Now, the August episode had quite a lot of interesting material, so without further ado, let's roll the first clip.
The complexity found in nature has inspired amazing achievements in technology. But it has also moved people to ask, was it designed? That's the title of an Awake series that first appeared in 2008. It's been a powerful tool to turn people's attention to Jehovah, the creator of all things. We're pleased to introduce the first in an exciting new video series based on those articles.
The trunk of the African elephant is an impressive multi-tool. It is both flexible and strong. Engineers admire the elephant trunk's remarkable flexibility. This comes from having no bone. Instead, it contains about 150,000 muscle units, an incredible marriage of strength and structure. Inspired by the elephant's trunk, researchers are designing robots for the future with greater flexibility. Industrial design often can be made better by copying the perfectly beautiful solutions in the natural world. What do you think? Did the elephant's trunk evolve?
Yes, it did evolve. Or at least if it didn't evolve, if you can prove that the elephant trunk didn't evolve, that it was created by some supernatural god or entity, then you really should publish your findings, get them peer-reviewed, and collect your Nobel Prize. That's how certain we are that the elephant trunk evolved. Why did it evolve? Why did it end up being so unique, so complex, so sophisticated? Because it needed to have those attributes in order for elephants to live long enough to procreate. That is essentially what evolution by natural selection is about. Evolution is about giving creatures or organisms the tools to be able to procreate. And if an elephant can't eat, then it can't procreate. If an elephant's trunk is too short to get to food, it can't reach food properly, then it's going to die before it can have offspring. Now, what's interesting is when I was researching for this video, someone brought to my attention a fantastic piece of evidence that demonstrates, because I'm aware that many people watching my videos simply don't know that much about evolution and how evolution works. They might have it in their heads that evolution teaches that one day there was an elephant without a trunk, and then it gave birth to an elephant that did have a trunk due to some mutation. That is not how it works. Evolution happens usually very, very slowly over many thousands of years. Gradually, organisms are able to better adapt to their environment, to better take advantage of their environment for the purposes of, again, procreation. But one of my Twitter followers brought to my attention a fantastic example of where evolution can produce something that isn't so sophisticated, because by Watchtower's logic, by creationist logic, everything about the elephants, everything about mammals, everything about life itself should be perfect. There should be no flaws. There should be nothing that doesn't make sense. But the laryngeal nerve is a fantastic example of nature getting it wrong, of there being a flaw that makes no sense according to intelligent design. Now, the laryngeal nerve in humans, it goes from the brain into the chest, round a major artery, and then back up to the larynx. It basically controls our voice and our breathing, things that you would normally use a larynx for. That's what the laryngeal nerve's for. Now, that's quite a big detour into the chest for quite a short distance between the brain and the larynx. But there's a reason it makes that detour. And it's because in fish obviously don't have necks, but the same nerve has a relatively short detour before it gets to where it needs to go. But as fish, over many, many millions of years, evolved into life forms that had necks, the nerve ended up getting extended and extended and extended. And the most extreme example is in giraffes, where the nerve literally comes out of the brain, goes all the way down the neck, wraps itself again through the arteries, and then goes back up the neck to more or less where it started from. There's only like a 2-inch difference between where the nerve originates and where it ends. And we're going to see now a dissection video demonstrating this phenomenon.
It really only needed to go about 2 inches.
Yes, amazing.
But it went all the way down and came all the way back.
Yes. That's a beautiful example of historical legacy as opposed to design.
Exactly. This is not an intelligent design. No. An intelligent design would be to go from here to here.
Yes.
It does kind of beg the question, though, that even in an animal that might have been many millions of years ago with its head down here, why the route round the blood vessels, unless there was a reason that they were there to innovate something else?
Well, that was in earlier ancestors. Then it was the most direct route in fish.
So it's just inherited.
It's a historical legacy.
Fish really don't have much of a neck, so there isn't any extension to worry about in a fish. It just goes directly there. Once you introduce a mammalian neck, you start to get a longer neck. Now the heart is displaced down lower.
It turns out the laryngeal nerve first evolved in fish-like creatures as a direct link from the brain to gills near the heart. Over millions of generations, this nerve gradually lengthened, each small step always simpler than a major rewiring to a more direct route.
Remember that a designer, an engineer, can go back to the drawing board, throw away the old design, start afresh with what looks more sensible. A designer has foresight. Evolution can't go back to the drawing board. Evolution has no foresight.
So what a fascinating piece of evidence demonstrating evolution and the fact that, the process of adaptation through natural selection can only move in one direction. It can't, as Richard Dawkins says, it can't kind of go back to the drawing board and start afresh and make sure everything's perfect. It can only work with what it's got, which is precisely why you have this phenomenon with the laryngeal nerve going this outrageous route when a far more efficient design would look completely different. This, by the way, isn't the only evidence for evolution. If you're still skeptical on this, because I realise a lot of people watching this video, you may either have been raised as a Jehovah's Witness, or you may be skeptical about evolution for other reasons. Go on YouTube and research some of the evidence for evolution in the fossil record, in DNA. It's all there. And when people call evolution a theory, they're not using the word theory in the sense that creationists like to point to, where there's, oh, well, there's some uncertainty over it. No, they're using it in the scientific context, in the same way as we would say the theory of gravity. What you will always see in Watchtower videos dealing with evolution, what we've seen time and time again, is something that's complicated in nature, and Watchtower pointing to complexity and saying that because it's complicated, it couldn't possibly have evolved. That is not the case with evolution. Evolution can create very complicated things. All it needs is the right reasons for the adaptations and plenty of time and multiple, in fact infinite, opportunities to get things wrong. And you can have any amount of complexity and sophistication. But Watchtower doesn't want you to think like that. Watchtower doesn't want you to know how evolution works. It basically just wants to push its own narrative. And what's most disturbing about that, and the way Watchtower pursues its narrative, is the way it insists on children taking in this scientific illiteracy, this ignorance about evolution, and then going into school and spreading that ignorance among their classmates.
This new video series can help you see the proof that there is a creator. It can especially help you young ones to recognize and reject the false teaching of evolution.
That's right. Evolution, despite being overwhelmingly endorsed by the scientific community, is a false teaching.
Use these new videos in your personal study and share them with classmates and teachers. They'll help you give an effective witness and bring honor to Jehovah. You'll find them in the video on demand section of JW Broadcasting.
For those who were previously unaware, Jehovah's Witness children do not just go to school to learn. They are to consider school as their own personal preaching territory and seize any opportunity to gain new converts for Watchtower, even in the classroom, where the organisation's propaganda material is to be unleashed on unsuspecting non-JW classmates.
I learned the truth when I was 19. Some witnesses came to preach in our town, and my father offered them a place to stay. He spoke with them all through the night, and then announced excitedly that he had found the truth. Eventually, I was baptized in the 1950s. My husband was favorable towards the truth, but got involved in political affairs in the community, and from there he began his political career. When I read 1 Peter 3:1 and 2, I understood that I needed to be in subjection to my husband, with the hope that he could be won over without a word by means of my conduct.
Meet Agapeta Reyes from Monterrey, Mexico, a Jehovah's Witness matriarch who will be praised for raising her many children to be Jehovah's Witnesses. When explaining the challenge posed by her initially unbelieving husband, Agapeta quotes from 1 Peter 3 verses 1 and 2, a verse that has repeatedly been used in Watchtower literature down through the decades as justification for JW wives to stay married to abusive husbands.
When my children were young, I made a weekly Bible study program for each of them. And as they grew up, the older kids helped me with their younger siblings.
I remember Mom always made an effort to teach me how to preach.
I would write presentations for the ministry on pieces of paper, and the kids would practice while they did their chores around the house.
Well, teaching your children how to preach is certainly better than teaching them the kind of stuff most parents teach their kids, such as, I don't know, things that are factually based and will have practical value for them as adults.
We set aside time 1 day a week for our family study.
It could be anything, a sack of potatoes, a sack of flour, or a houseplant. She would tell me, imagine that this is a person you meet in field service. What would you say to them? When I finished, she would say to me, the way you did it just now, do it like that when you go out in the ministry.
Hello there, my name's Lloyd, and today I'm sharing this wonderful leaflet, Where Can We Find Answers to Life's Big Questions? Would you say no to a copy? No, I thought you wouldn't. Actually, I have to say it's a real thrill to meet people who are so agreeable to everything I say to them. In fact, while I'm on a roll, I hope you don't mind if I push my luck and ask whether you would consider getting baptized today as one of Jehovah's Witnesses. That's fantastic. By your clear, unambiguous refusal to say no to baptism, you indicate your dedication to Jehovah's Witnesses as God's Spirit-directed organisation. Congratulations. Mother, the potatoes are ready for rinsing.
Now, my health and my memory are fading. I can't do as much in the ministry as before. But even so, thanks to the help of the brothers in the congregation, I'm not giving up.
She's not giving up. With a bit of tweaking, that would be an awesome theme for a regional convention.
42 years after I received the kingdom message, my husband was baptized. Another great blessing was seeing my children grow in the truth and use their youth to serve Jehovah.
Just in case there is any ambiguity on this, young people should use their youth to serve Jehovah.
Some have served as special pioneers, circuit overseers, or in Bethel.
If it wasn't for her help and the support of my siblings, perhaps we wouldn't be part of the organization today.
And what a disaster that would be.
But thanks to her, we started out on the best course in life. Words cannot express how grateful I am to her.
I now find great joy in seeing my grandchildren and great-grandchildren follow their parents' example.
Multiple generations of a family in Mexico are now loyal servants of our high-control religious group, thanks to the older generation being deceived. Who knew that child indoctrination could be so effective?
The theme for our program is The Women Proclaiming the Good News. Sadly, throughout human history, women have been subjected to injustice, violence, and abuse. Why is that?
Well, I'm sure there are lots of contributing factors. One factor that cannot be ignored is the continuing legacy of blind devotion to religious texts urging the subjugation of women. Texts brimming with backward dogma written centuries ago by men living in primitive patriarchal societies in which women are repeatedly subjected to injustice, violence, and abuse.
Notice what God says. Your longing will be for your husband, and he will dominate you.
Kinky, although again, these are hardly words that inspire respect and equality for women.
When God said that Adam would dominate his wife, God was not indicating his approval of the subjugation of woman by man. He was simply foretelling the sad consequences of sin on the first couple.
Consequences that he had engineered. It was, after all, God who decided both the rules and the penalties for breaking them. Penalties that were apparently to be more severe for women than for men. This, I'm afraid, is a typical example of Watchtower assuming the Bible is incapable of babbling utter nonsense or contradicting itself, and therefore indulging in spectacularly woeful logical gymnastics in an attempt to square the circle. There is simply no getting round the fact that the Bible singles out women for subjugation at the hands of men from the beginning.
So abuse of women is a direct outcome of the sinful nature of humans, not of God's will.
Yes, though you, like me, may be appalled at centuries of abuse and mistreatment of women, abuse that has been meted out with scriptural justification, you can at least take heart from knowing that all of this is a perfectly reasonable punishment for one woman asking one man to eat a piece of fruit.
Jehovah makes clear in His Word, the Bible, that women and men have equal standing before Him. In fact, He indicated that women would play a vital role in the outworking of His purpose.
Okay, two things here. First of all, you can say a lot about the Bible, but one thing that you cannot say is that women and men are treated equally in the scriptures. You just can't say that. And I'm going to give a number of examples through the course of this video to demonstrate why that's the case. I think it's interesting the choice of wording that Ralph Walls uses. He says that women and men have equal standing before God, because that makes the whole issue a little bit more obscure. He isn't talking necessarily about equality between men and women being treated equally. He's very cleverly using words that talk about the way men and women, the standing that men and women have before God, which is more obscure and I think deliberate. He's deliberately making it difficult for us to know exactly what it is he's talking about. But then he talks about women having a vital role in the outworking of God's purpose. And I think what he's talking about, judging by some of the material that gets shown in this episode, I think he's basically talking about the Messiah and the fact that women were involved in the line that ended up producing the Messiah over many centuries. Well, obviously women had to be involved. You couldn't not have women involved if it was a case of multiple generations or successive generations producing a chosen saviour. So again, I'm not quite sure how any of this points to women being either esteemed or being treated with equality in the scriptures.
Then Miriam, the prophetess, Aaron's sister, took a tambourine in her hand, and all the women followed her with tambourines and with dances. Miriam sang in response to the men, "Sing to Jehovah, for He has become highly exalted. The horse and its rider He has hurled into the sea." Picture that scene. There were an estimated 3 million people in the nation of Israel. Imagine, out of that large number, all the women were dancing and singing praises to Jehovah. That was undoubtedly a large army. What a great shout of praise to Jehovah that was.
Absolutely. What an incredible shout of praise. There is, after all, nothing remotely misogynistic about women being tasked with providing the entertainment in the wake of a key victory. Also, as I've pointed out in previous videos, I'm not sure there was much cause for celebration here. After all, out of millions of people to make it across the Red Sea into the wilderness of Sinai, all but Joshua, Caleb, and a few Levites would end up dying in the desert.
What about today? The report for the 2017 service year shows that there were over 8.3 million publishers proclaiming the good news throughout the earth. Keep in mind that in most lands, it is not unusual for our dear sisters to make up over half of our special pioneers and nearly 3/4 of those who serve in the regular pioneer work. In addition, many other sisters are wholeheartedly spreading the good news of the kingdom to the best of their ability within their circumstances.
Well, it's not like there is much else for you to do in the organisation if you are a woman. Since you can't be a ministerial servant or elder, you can't teach from the platform, and you can't so much as operate the sound equipment at the meetings, If you take your faith seriously, you may as well busy yourself in the pioneer service. After all, when it comes to deciding who gets the privilege of recruiting fresh converts, Watchtower is less choosy about how a person's plumbing is configured.
Many of our faithful single sisters are spending themselves in Jehovah's service in theocratic construction and maintenance work, Bethel service, and serving where the need is greater, which includes serving in foreign language fields.
Ah yes, I almost forgot. In addition to recruiting fresh converts, women also can have the privilege of helping Watchtower build stuff. After all, assembling materials and operating tools and machinery is less likely to involve teaching men or expressing an opinion.
Clearly, Jehovah values this large army of sisters.
If you say so, Ralph.
Did you notice when we read the scripture in Exodus chapter 15 that Miriam was described as a prophetess? Evidently, she was privileged to be used as an instrument of divine communication. In some instances, this no doubt included singing songs that were inspired by Jehovah. Miriam was not the only one in the scriptures with this designation. Other women in the Bible record, such as Anna and Isaiah's wife, were also spoken of as prophetesses.
Having utterly failed to convince us that women are treated with respect and equality among Jehovah's Witnesses, Ralph now sets about making a case for the Bible esteeming women because certain female Bible characters were described as prophetesses. But any notion of the Bible lauding women as conduits of divine wisdom must be weighed against the writings of the Apostle Paul in verses such as the following. Let a woman learn in silence, with full submissiveness. I do not permit a woman to teach or to exercise authority over a man, but she is to remain silent. And 1 Corinthians 14 verses 33 and 34. As in all the congregations of the holy ones, let the women keep silent in the congregations, for it is not permitted for them to speak. Rather, let them be in subjection, as the law also says.
At 2 Kings chapter 22 and verse 8, we read that while the temple was being repaired, the original book of the law was found. When it was read to Josiah, he was distraught at seeing how far off the nation had strayed from Jehovah's law. At verse 13, he directed the priest, the secretary, and other influential men. Go, inquire of Jehovah in my behalf, in behalf of the people, and in behalf of all Judah concerning the words of this book that has been found. How did they accomplish this? Verse 14 continues, So Hilkiah the priest, Ahikam, Akbor, Shaphan, and Asaiah went to Huldah the prophetess. It's interesting that Jehovah used this faithful woman to convey his direction, and that prominent men and priests sought her divinely inspired advice.
I'm glad Ralph has mentioned this account in 2 Kings about the book of the law being found during the reign of King Josiah during temple renovations. Interestingly, following textual analysis of the scriptures and careful comparative study of archaeology for this period, many scholars are convinced that what was being described in these verses wasn't so much a discovery of the book of the law, but the actual completion of the book of Deuteronomy. One remarkable and highly recommended book on Bible archaeology, titled The Bible Unearthed by Israel Finkelstein and Neil Asher Silberman, has the following to say on page 281. To sum up, there is little doubt that an original version of Deuteronomy is the book of the law mentioned in 2 Kings. Rather than being an old book that was suddenly discovered, it seems safe to conclude that it was written in the 7th century BCE just before or during Josiah's reign.
The Christian Greek scriptures, however, do not permit sisters to serve in such a capacity as did Deborah and other prophetesses in the nation of Israel.
Yes, we know exactly why that is, Ralph, and it has not gone unnoticed that you are not reading to us the writings of Paul that insist on women being silent.
However, Titus chapter 2, verses 3 and 4, encourages older women to display spiritual qualities so that they may advise the younger women in spiritual matters. Let's read those verses. Likewise, let the older women be reverent in behavior, not slanderous, not enslaved to a lot of wine, teachers of what is good, so that they may advise the younger women to love their husbands, to love their children.
Well, that's a relief. I guess we can excuse the verses where women are commanded to be silent because here, at least, women are allowed to talk to other women.
How we appreciate the spiritually mature sisters among us who provide such fine assistance to younger sisters or those who are newer in the truth. However, today Jehovah has delegated authority to men. They scripturally qualify to serve as elders and ministerial servants in order to serve, guide, and protect his people.
Men scripturally qualify to serve, guide, and protect God's people. Again, it's very interesting the way that Ralph uses language here. He says, today it's men who qualify. Well, it's not just today, it's also in Bible times, because as is quite plainly evident, it was in the Bible, in the New Testament, in the writings of Paul, that women were told to shut up and were told that, well, actually it's men who need to be doing the teaching here. So it's not a case of today, it's a case of in the Bible, according to the Bible. Women must be subjugated, women must be silenced. So that's why Jehovah's Witnesses have this rule whereby only men can be elders and ministerial servants. And, that's misogynistic anyway, but it leads to problems. And we saw that in the Australian Royal Commission, especially when it comes to issues surrounding child sex abuse. Because one thing that the Royal Commission pointed out was that you simply shouldn't have a scenario where a female victim of child sex abuse has to deal with a kangaroo court of men in adjudicating whether her claims can be taken seriously or not. She should be able to confide in a female who has authority to take things further. You just don't have that in Jehovah's Witnesses, because they have to, in their eyes, they have to take everything that's in the Bible absolutely literally. And if Paul went on a couple of rants in his writings about women shutting up and men doing all the talking, well, that's the way Jehovah's Witnesses feel they have to do it. But they do it to, I would argue, a ridiculous degree, to the point where women are only basically allowed in the congregation to do very, very menial work. As I've argued in previous videos, if you were to take a pole and put a microphone on the end of it, well, that's a piece of equipment that a woman wouldn't be able to do anything with, because that would be operating the sound system. But if you take the same pole and put a mop head on it, oh, well, suddenly that's a piece of equipment that a woman can do something with, because women are allowed to do the cleaning. They're not allowed to operate electrical circuitry that is designed to convey the human voice, but they are allowed to operate chemicals and materials if it's for the purpose of keeping a hall clean, for the purpose of mopping and wiping and cleaning toilets and that kind of thing. All of that sort of thing apparently is scripturally acceptable for women to involve themselves with. Honestly, it's just outrageous. And what makes it more outrageous is the way that Ralph tries to excuse it all. And the whole purpose of this episode seems to be to create this smoke screen so that Jehovah's Witness women won't notice how unfair the whole thing is and won't notice the fact that they are well and truly being subjugated.
Finally, think of the outstanding faith of another woman mentioned in the Bible, Mary. What an awesome responsibility Jehovah entrusted her with, bearing and raising his own son as a human. We can only imagine the thoughts that were going through her mind when she was told of this assignment.
Yes, I'm sure Mary felt overwhelmed with pride to have her uterus rented out by the Almighty for the birth of a male, because that was, after all, one of the few privileges to which women in the Bible could aspire, the birthing of more men. Male offspring, you must understand, are more valuable in the eyes of God than female offspring. If you don't believe me, turn to Leviticus 12 verses 1 to 5, in which women are told that they are ritually unclean for double the amount of time if they give birth to girls than if they give birth to boys. There's just no pleasant way to say this. If you want to believe that the Bible is God's infallible word, you must believe that God does not view women as equal to men. Indeed, that the entire purpose of women is to complement or serve men. As the Apostle Paul put it with characteristic eloquence at 1 Corinthians 11 verses 8 and 9, "For man did not come from woman, but woman came from man. And what is more, man was not created for the sake of the woman, but woman for the sake of the man."
Look, Jehovah's slave girl, may it happen to me according to your declaration. She must have wondered how Jehovah would accomplish these things, but she was humble and obedient. Faithful men such as Moses and Jeremiah hesitated when given a challenging assignment from God. Not Mary. What a beautiful example she set for all of us, men and women.
You may not be aware of this, but the Bible account of Mary being divinely impregnated and giving birth despite being a virgin is an excellent example of Bible writers inventing stories to suit a previously established narrative. If you haven't already done so, I recommend you research Mary Alma Virgin on Google. Put simply, when the writer of Matthew was telling the story of Jesus' birth, he invented the entire account of the virgin birth because of a mistranslation in the Septuagint, which was an early Greek translation of the Hebrew scriptures. In the original Hebrew, the verse at Isaiah 7 verse 14 predicted that a young woman, or Almah, would give birth to a son and name him Emmanuel. But translators of the Septuagint, due to a mistranslation of the word Almah, instead called for the Messiah to be born of not just a young woman, but a virgin. So the writer of Matthew happily obliged.
Clearly, Jehovah has always highly valued women, and we are privileged to serve today with millions of hardworking sisters. How pleased Jehovah must be to see dear sisters serving him humbly and faithfully. We urge you, sisters, please keep up your good work and continue to be a positive influence in the congregation. God has indeed granted you faithful women the privilege of participating in the fulfillment of the psalmist's words. Jehovah gives the command, the women proclaiming the good news are a large army.
And that apparently is supposed to keep women in Jehovah's organization satisfied that everything is perfectly fair and just, that they aren't being singled out and discriminated against on the basis of basically their plumbing, and that they should just be humble and satisfied that they are part of a large army, which is of crucial, vital importance to Watchtower. Well, no doubt it is. It's always crucial for Watchtower to have a massive reserve of compliant workers who can busy themselves in the work of going out and finding new recruits. But again, that in no way means that women are being treated with fairness and equality in the Jehovah's Witness religion. But we will now get an example, or supposedly an example, of the model Jehovah's Witness woman, a lady named Bertille Kapayan from a congregation in America, who it turns out later Ralph Walls knows personally.
My mom made sure that I and my siblings knew the truth. She studied with us when no other children in the congregation had Bible studies at home. Of course, we kind of kicked and didn't like it, but was glad she did it.
Arguably, most children aren't naturally keen on being indoctrinated with unsubstantiated religious dogma. But once the indoctrination has progressed to a sufficient degree, they feel immensely privileged to have hit the jackpot of being born into God's one and only true faith, and are eager to pass their unique knowledge on to the next generation. And so on and so on.
In our congregation, there were brothers and sisters of the Anointed. They were always very kind to me, and they encouraged me. I worked in service with them, and I thought, that's the way I want to be.
Isn't it interesting that a Jehovah's Witness woman who is one of the Anointed can look forward to having dominion over the whole planet in heaven as one of only 144,000 of Christ's co-rulers, but meanwhile, while she's on the earth, she doesn't even get a say in what goes on in her congregation?
I had some opposition in the territories, and one was this lady was very irate. And she went to kick me, and she kicked me right in the stomach. And so then anyway, I dismissed myself. Then, a while later, it was time to work the territory again. Nobody wanted to go there, and we didn't have do not calls, I don't think at that time. At least there wasn't any in the territory. So then anyway, I called by and I mentioned to her, oh, well, hello there. I know I've had the opportunity to talk with you before. Yes, she remembered. And I said, well, perhaps you were having a bad day that day.
Jehovah's Witnesses are here encouraged to return to householders who strongly object to their calling, even if these are violently abusive toward them.
As far as health is concerned, my everyday health is very good. But I have a leg that drives me crazy. I think back of Jacob. He served Jehovah with a limp. And then I think of Paul. And so then those things keep you humble. I've prayed and prayed and prayed about it, but just like with the Apostle Paul, it didn't disappear. And so then I just say, patch me up till Armageddon. It'll disappear then.
In case you're unfamiliar with Jehovah's Witness beliefs, witnesses believe that God will soon annihilate 7 billion men, women and children to make way for a global population comprised solely of Jehovah's Witnesses like Bertille Kapayan, who can look forward to having their legs fixed once the last few bodies have been buried.
I've needed work, I've needed money, I've needed strength, I've needed companionship, because a lot of times I'm in the ministry by myself. I talk to Jehovah. And so then he's always there for me.
A bit like an invisible friend on whom you can always rely to listen to your problems without responding in any meaningful way.
I definitely want to keep pioneering or serving Jehovah the best I can, regardless of what comes up. There is nothing more joyful than to see that you have helped somebody live forever. Well, how much better could it be?
I hate to break this to you, Bertille, but it's impossible for you to see that you have helped someone live forever. You can certainly see that you have convinced someone to share your belief that by serving a bunch of guys in New York, you get a ticket to eternal life in a paradise earth. But rather than knowing or seeing that you or they were right, you simply have to hope that the promises you've given them will come to pass. Promises that, as with those of any religion, are faith-based and objectively amount to little more than wishful thinking.
Sister Capellan had a profound effect on those she witnessed to. I know this because she found me in the door-to-door ministry when I was 14 years old. At that age, I had the goal to be a doctor. One night after the meeting, Bertil said to me, "Well, you know, in the new world, we won't need doctors because Jesus will do all the healing." Honestly, that hit me hard because I wanted to help people as well as provide for my mother. But she added, "What we will need is teachers." I thought that was a good idea. Still focused on a career, I had one type of teacher in mind, but she had another. Through her patience and reasoning, she helped me to become the most important kind of teacher, a teacher of God's Word.
And there's the big reveal that Ralph Walls knows Sister Capellan personally, because Sister Capellan actually had a role in dissuading Ralph from becoming a doctor. Because apparently we don't need doctors, especially in the new world. Once there's a paradise earth and everyone's perfect, there'll be no need for anyone to fix people's ailments and injuries and whatever. All that's needed apparently are teachers, teachers of God's Word, or in other words, teachers of God's Word as interpreted by Watchtower. So thanks to Sister Capellan, the world has one less doctor. And I actually think this perfectly demonstrates how insidious Jehovah's Witness beliefs are. It's not just a case of, oh, well, you know, you might die as a result of a blood transfusion, or, oh, well, you're at risk of having your family dismantled if one of your family members becomes disfellowshipped. There are other more nuanced ways in which Jehovah's Witness thinking erodes society. And one of them is this example here of a man who is obviously quite capable, and, you know, he presents himself very well. He looks like he could be a doctor, if that means anything. But he's been dissuaded from doing that. He's been dissuaded from following that journey and is now basically just a puppet for a cult. And that's because of the mentality that Jehovah's Witnesses have, where nothing in this world matters. Everything is about the future world. Well, I say everything. They're still quite happy to accrue power and wealth and influence in this world. But at least as far as the theology is concerned, we can forget about contributing to society as things stand and just focus all our efforts on the future paradise when mankind will magically have everything done for it. And the only thing they need to do for themselves is learn, is teach, is take in and dispense knowledge. So a perfect example of just how insidious Jehovah's Witness beliefs can be.
When I started learning sign language, it just seemed to come natural for me. After I transferred to the congregation, I remember feeling so happy. I was pioneering and really enjoying this new way of communicating. It's funny how the thing you love can also be the thing that tests you.
Predictably, this dramatization will take something perfectly innocent, like learning a new language, and twist it into something sinister. The sister featured has learned sign language to help Watchtower recruit more people to the Witness faith, but it turns out learning sign language can be a slippery slope to becoming a workaholic, as this sister is about to discover before being pulled from the brink and reminded to put spiritual things first.
Soon I took the test for a sign language interpreter. I couldn't believe I passed. I loved my new job. My hope was that it would support my pioneering and maybe allow me to travel one day to a country and preach where there was a need for sign language.
As is frequently the case with young witnesses, the fictional witness girl fantasizes about moving to an exotic country to serve where the, quote, need is great. This does make some sense because, as things stand, if Armageddon were to come tomorrow, a disproportionate number of survivors would be from countries that just happen to have high ratios of Jehovah's Witnesses, whereas the fate of people in countries with low ratios, or where the preaching work of witnesses is under ban, apparently isn't of huge concern to Jehovah.
My boss was very happy with my work, so much so that he began to give me more. Everyone seemed appreciative. And the extra money didn't hurt.
Ah yes, the extra money. As I said, success with your career is a slippery slope because, as we are repeatedly warned in Watchtower propaganda, if you're not giving 100% to serving Jehovah, you must be a selfish, materialistic worshipper of riches.
I was handling it all fine. Okay, for a while. My boss asked me to work full-time for a few months to get some extra training. The raise could help me with planning my trip abroad. I knew my parents would be concerned. I knew because I felt it too. I was already dragging physically. But then again, it would only be for a few months. I was really torn.
Thankfully, this poor girl, who is teetering on the edge of spiritual disaster after doing well at work and being late for meetings, will be pulled from the brink when her dad gives her a timely reminder from the Bible about Timothy.
He helped me to see that Timothy set spiritual goals for himself growing up. But Paul was now telling him, don't stop. Even though Timothy was a grown spiritual man, Paul encouraged him to continue setting new spiritual goals. In fact, to persevere in them. What was I persevering in? I kindly turned down the offer and explained to my boss that I'd like to keep my hours to a minimum so I could support my number one job. It might take me longer to save my money, but I'll make that trip one day with Jehovah's help and a little perseverance.
Yes, it's a happily ever after ending for this girl who naively flirted with making a success of herself outside of the organisation, only to discover that putting Watchtower's needs first and her own needs second is the way to go. But Watchtower isn't done urging young people to put kingdom interests first, as we will see in this month's music video.
Precious daughter, he's so proud of you. Time won't alter his love for you.
So this is the music video, the part I'm sure you've all been waiting for. This is the music video for the August broadcasting episode, and it's basically following the life of a daughter who grows up as a Jehovah's Witness because she's been indoctrinated from the get-go to follow that religion. And what I find fascinating, I mean, there's lots of little, interesting things hidden in the lyrics. One of them is what we've just heard, where the lyrics say, "Time won't alter his love for you." And surely I don't need to explain how ironic that is, because the truth is that when you are in the Jehovah's Witness religion, time can very much alter someone's love for someone else, especially when it comes to people realizing that the beliefs aren't true, deciding that the religion is no longer for them, deciding they want nothing more to do with the religion, while the love definitely changes. The love vanishes, in fact, because it's conditional love. The love that this father has for his daughter should be constant. It shouldn't be possible for the love to ever disappear. But when you're in Jehovah's Witnesses, if a son or daughter ends up getting disfellowshipped or decides that the religion isn't for them, especially if they become sufficiently vocal about the fact that the religion isn't for them, well, then the love that the parents have for the organisation supersedes their natural paternal instincts, and their humanity gets put on hold. They forget about their affection for their children. That's one of the most insidious things about the Jehovah's Witness faith.
Hard work and sacrifice, that's just her way. Thinking of his advice helps her through the day, and she's so glad to know that he loves her.
In case the message wasn't sufficiently clear from earlier in this JW Broadcasting episode, Jehovah's Witness children don't just go to school to learn, they also go to school to preach to other school children.
Precious daughter, I'm so proud of you. Time won't alter my love for you. Yes, Jehovah sees and Jehovah knows all the work you've done and the love you've shown. No, he won't forget how you loved his name for all this time. Precious daughter, he's so proud of you. He's so proud of you. Precious daughter, he'll be there for you. He'll be there for you. Precious daughter, he will care for you.
My theme for this little discussion is husbands, love your wife as yourself. If you think about it, we just naturally, inherently love ourselves, don't we?
Yes, Stephen, we generally do as humans love ourselves, but very few of us go one step further and insist that we are one of only a handful of humans on the planet who are spokespersons for God the Almighty.
We certainly would make sure we provide the food and other material needs that our wife has.
Please bear in mind that the governing body are mentally trapped in the 1950s, when providing for the material needs of the family was solely the husband's prerogative.
And regarding this, I think of our brothers in concentration camps in Nazi Germany. Food was very scarce, but our brothers, even then, from their meager food ration, would share food with other brothers, even in some cases with worldly people.
Stephen Lett here refers to reports that during the Second World War, Jehovah's Witnesses incarcerated in Nazi concentration camps shared their food rations with non-witness inmates. Assuming this account is true, and honestly it sounds perfectly plausible to me, it begs the question, why do witnesses today confine their relief and disaster response efforts solely to fellow believers? Why can't they follow the admirable example set for them both in the parable of the Good Samaritan and the organization's own history of hurrying to the aid of those who don't share their beliefs?
But now let's get a third way that husbands just naturally love themselves. We adorn ourselves. 1 Timothy 2:9 speaks of women adorning themselves in appropriate dress. Well, husbands try to do the same thing. And in adorning ourselves, we try to cover over, minimize our flaws. Cover our bulges, our blemishes. We try to make ourselves look as good as possible, don't we? Well, what does loving our wife as ourself require? For one thing, we certainly wouldn't shine the spotlight on her flaws. We wouldn't do this in the presence of others. We would try hard not to even do it in our own mind. Rather, we seek to cover over minor sins and transgressions as encouraged at Proverbs 19:11, where it says, "It is beauty to overlook an offense."
If only the governing body could take the advice in this scripture to heart by being quicker to overlook offences by rank-and-file witnesses, particularly in instances where the penalty is disfellowshipping and family estrangement. Such mercy would be especially welcome given the fact that the governing body's own offences include multiple examples of false predictions, deception, hypocrisy, and double standards throughout the organisation's recent history, not to mention well-documented reports of the widespread covering up of child sex abuse. For all of this, the governing body grants itself a full pardon, refusing to apologise and sweeping their transgressions under the rug. But when a JW teenager has sex with another teenager, the punishment can be immediate and life-destroying.
Mark 5:26 talks about a woman who was very sick. She suffered at the hands of many physicians. She spent all her resources. She didn't get any better. She got worse. But the point is, she was really trying hard to heal herself. Well, husbands try to do the same thing. So if we're sick or injured, we try to get extra rest. We'll buy medicine. We'll take vitamins. We'll make an appointment with a doctor. We'll pursue therapy. See, we try to get well.
I can't help but notice the irony of Jehovah's Witnesses being commended for pursuing the advice of doctors and medical professionals when such advice can only result from people going through years of college or university education, which the organisation frowns on to the point of repeatedly dissuading young witnesses from higher education. Basically, when it comes to higher education, witnesses have it both ways, reaping the rewards of non-witnesses bettering themselves through college and university, while denying their children the opportunity to do the same.
What does loving our wife as ourself require then? Well, we would certainly do all within our power if she's sick or injured. Try to help her get well.
Obviously, when he says witnesses would do all within their power, what he means is all within their power apart from accepting treatment with blood, even if this is the only way to preserve life.
But now here's one more, a fifth way that husbands just naturally love themselves. We make allowances, excuses if we make mistakes. Husbands who make mistakes are often heard blaming it on their heredity, or maybe the environment, their blood sugar level, how much sleep they got or didn't get the night before, the weather, and so forth. We tend to well understand our own limitations, don't we? And we allow for that. Well, what about loving our wife as herself? We'd make the same allowances for her, being positive, imputing good motives to her. If she speaks a little roughly, acts a little thoughtlessly, we'll try to discern the feelings behind the words or actions. We'll make allowance, especially if we can discern that she's under some kind of emotional pressure. We'll make that allowance for her like we would for ourselves.
Again, it would be easier to stomach this material about witnesses making allowances for each other if the person speaking these words wasn't in the habit of urging the breaking up of families as a means of punishment, including in instances where someone decides to leave the organisation for conscientious reasons.
Husbands, we know your wife will never grow tired of your efforts to apply that counsel.
Så märker man hur de...
It is clear to us that they appreciate their privilege more and more. They actually see it as praise to Jehovah.
Den glädjen som de har.
The joy they have of singing for Jehovah rubs off on us who work with them.
When the children sing with joy and express themselves freely, it has an effect on us as parents and the ones in the congregation.
A selection of cult followers pat themselves on the back for exploiting the vocal talents of children who have been indoctrinated to believe as they do. They believe that using these children to produce stirring music designed to entice yet more young minds into spending their lives serving Watchtower is cause for celebration.
Our program has shown us how much Jehovah values what women do in the family, in the congregation, and in the ministry. To all of our sisters, please be assured that we love you. And it's our prayer that Jehovah continues to bless your work.
And that pretty much brings us to the end of the August episode, in which we have seen Ralph Walls trying to convince Jehovah's Witness women that they are valued, that they are appreciated, that they aren't at all treated with inequality or subjugated or told to be silent or refused any kind of privileges that involve teaching or voicing opinions. Apparently, women should be grateful for the position that they have within Jehovah's organisation. So a very interesting episode, interesting that Watchtower evidently feels the need to make these claims, even though they are claims that I don't feel add up. I should have mentioned earlier, actually, that Ralph Walls is one of the few members of the governing body / governing body helpers that I've actually met in person. In fact, probably out of all of them, he's the one I know best. I met him, let's see, back in 2003 when I was still a witness and I was visiting New York, and I actually ended up giving a talk in his congregation, and he had some nice things to say about my talk. So it's kind of odd to be doing this rebuttal of somebody who basically I know in person. But I can only say that from my own experience, Ralph's a nice guy. I think it's easy, and probably this is a good point to make for all of the rebuttals. It's very easy to kind of throw our ire and our frustration at these messengers when they say stuff that's just ludicrous, that we know isn't true, that makes no sense according to our own experience as witnesses. But people like Ralph, they don't really get an opinion. They basically just have to toe the party line, say what they need to say, and yeah, they don't have much control over things. And I just know personally that Ralph is one of the good guys, and I think it's a real shame that in his earlier career as a Jehovah's Witness, he was put off from being a doctor, because I think he could have made a really good contribution to society in that role. Instead, he's been dragged into a cult, and he's basically having his life used up in service of Watchtower, which I think is a real shame. And rather than directing our anger at him, I think people like Ralph deserve our sympathy. So that's pretty much all I had to say for the August broadcasting episode. I'm a little bit behind with my rebuttals at the moment. I've still got to do the Sunday rebuttal for the Don't Give Up convention. I've also got to do the September broadcasting rebuttal. I'm also behind with my Warwick mini documentary, so lots and lots of things to do. I've also got lots of interviews lined up. I'm trying to do more interviews on the channel, as you may have noticed. So stay tuned for all of that. I hope you found this video interesting, and as always, thank you for watching.